Okay, we do need to begin. So first of all, I hope you guys are not getting confused with all these multiple pre-Socratic Greeks. I know it can be a little bit confusing with so many of them being squished into such a small amount of time. We will go more slowly after that. There won't be that many of them every week. Usually there will be just one philosopher per week rather than so many of them, but it's kind of necessary to go through these important ones first, and the way the book has it and everything. There's only two choices. Either we would spend like half of the class talking about them, or they have to be all compressed. But there are several important things about them which hopefully you will be able to get from these classes. And so we will emphasize the most important stuff every time at the beginning, so it would be a little bit more clear to you what exactly you should concentrate on, right? So that is, of course, something to keep in mind. Don't get confused if you're too overwhelmed with everything. Yes, hello everybody once again. So few words about the exam. So we will do these reviews for the exam every time. I hope you got my message. This is important because remember, I have it on Canvas, and I also attached this review so every one of you could print it out and keep track of what you need to know for the exam. The 30 questions on the exam will come from this review. The review has 45 questions. 30 of them will be on the exam. So this is the way to prepare for the exam, and also to again keep track of what is important, what you should know every single time. And you should really do it in small portions. Try every
year.
I'm sorry, okay, I guess somebody just... Are you asking a question or? I guess not. Anyway, so yeah, guys, keep track of all this stuff, and if you do it in small portions, it will be very easy, and you will be prepared for the exam in time for the exam. But if you try to just cram it into the last day or two, then it will really be kind of overwhelming, and you may, of course, still be able to trace it all back, but it's not the best way to go. Okay, with that in mind, let's look at some of the stuff from the previous class, which you really should remember and understand. How can we summarize the Homeric notion of virtue? If you wanted to summarize it, how would you do it? Suppose this is the question on the exam. The Homer, the poet Homer, what was his notion of virtue? So remember, Homer is the poet who has written Iliad and Odyssey. Do not confuse him with Hesiod, who we had a little poem from. Nonetheless, we did mention him last time, and you should really know that. So I suppose if it was a question on the exam, you would be completely lost. The Homeric notion of virtue would be personal excellence. Remember, warrior hero. Personal excellence would be the correct answer. Now, how about the next question? What is the main difference between the poetic and philosophical approach? We'll give extra credit if you answer it correctly. So what is the difference? Poetic approach, philosophical, is it the same thing? Well, Daniela, that's kind of a very vague way to answer it. Romanza says the feeling of experience. Well, it is true, but I mean that's not the best way to summarize it, especially if you want to summarize it in like few words. The key word here would be rational approach. Philosophic approach is rational, based on reasoning. The poetic approach is not based on reasoning. It's generally just based on some sort of tradition, mythology, and so on. So remember when we talked about, for example, solar eclipse, the poetic approach would of course come up with all sorts of beautiful stuff, but it would not really look for the true causes of that. What is causing the rain? What is causing the thunder? Is it just because one of the gods was crying and his beautiful tears were falling on our heads? Well, that approach leads you nowhere. Reasoning is definitely, that's okay. So I guess Abba gets it correctly. So keep in mind, this is the key word in case if that is, for example, on the exam. Also remember, the exam is multiple choice. So it's not that you need to write down an essay about difference between poetic and philosophical approaches. You just need to pick one of the correct answers. So if you are on the right track with this word such as reason, rational approach, then of course you would immediately find it. But if you start looking for feeling or knowledge or something like that, then you may not find any answer which will fit that. So on one hand it's easier to do it with multiple choice, on the other hand you really should have a little bit of a more clear idea what I'm looking for. Okay, now how about why is Thales considered first philosopher? Because it's related to the previous question, right? 585 BC, what happened? Just because of this year, everybody who lived in this year could be a philosopher then? Right, he predicted it, but again, you have to explain it a little bit better. So he predicted it based on what? Maybe he predicted it based on some sort of Homeric book. They found there that it says certain period of time will pass after the gods gathered on the Mount Olympus, and then there will be a solar eclipse. Was that the case?
Was he the philosopher that first established monism?
Well, monism, nobody really established monism. In fact, we call it monism today, right? Because we classify it in this way. They didn't even have a word monism. So that's not exactly how I would put it. So when we look back at them, we say what they were doing seems to be a type of monism, right? So it's not like somebody established it. It's just the way they thought about reality. But again, the question is more or less about why is he considered first philosopher. Establishing monism really would not be the answer. So he was thinking abstractly and looking for the actual causes of things based on reasoning. Right, that's the answer. He really tried to find the actual causes rather than again looking back at some sort of tradition, the work of Homer or whoever, which would be a poetic approach. But that poetic approach would never help you to predict the solar eclipse. Right? Monism is actually slightly of a different issue there. It is related to them looking for the fundamental stuff, right? When he was saying it is water, that was type of monism because he thought it was one thing. It was water. Everything made of water. Anyway, now how about what does the Greek word logos means? Reason would be very partial answer. It means a lot more than that, and that's the whole point. If it just meant reason...
it had many different meanings to it.
Yeah, you have to give me at least a couple of them. Because apart from reason, there's another important one.
There was speech, discourse, reasoning with one of them, thought.
Okay, yeah, that is more or less what I'm looking for. So Luis, good job. So again, remember, it has several meanings. rational discourse or discourse, word, reason, and rational order. Now all this is important. There are different meanings for us. When we're talking about rational order of things, we're not calling it a word, right? And when we're talking about words, we certainly don't call them reason. But the word logos really had all of this kind of packed tightly into this word. For them, it meant the same thing. The word is not a sufficient way to translate it, say, in the Bible, because to say at the beginning there was word and the word was with God, it just seemed like the God was just saying words or something. And that's not what they mean. They mean it was also reason, and it was a rational order, like a plan of some sort, right? Some sort of mental structure of the reality was already with God. That's what that part of the Bible actually suggests. God already had some sort of a plan as to how things are going to work out. Now, note that again, if you understand Greek language, it's easier to understand this meaning. And finally, how would you sum up Heraclitus's view of reality? If you had to sum it up, what would you say? Again, there's a bunch of stuff there, but in this case, I'm looking for one thing. Yeah, everything changes, exactly. Opinion, that's your third extra credit. Good job. Yes, everything changes. That's exactly it. Okay, and keep in mind, guys, I only have to give it to the first person who gives the correct answer. Otherwise, it'll be like way too many extra credits. So I know it's a little bit of a racehorse then, but nonetheless, that's how we're going to do it. But there's multiple questions, right? So this is, again, the stuff you need to know for the exam. And keep that in mind. You can rewatch this video and, again, get all of this if you want to. But note that by the time of the exam, there will be probably like another, I don't know, 10 videos or something. So rewatching all of them may be a little bit of a burden. So if you do it bit by bit, it's a little bit easier. Anyway. Yeah, the exam is March 1st. We have homework and quizzes every week. They are kind of smaller bits on Mindtab. The exam will be on Canvas. It will have 30 questions. You will have 45 minutes. It will be March 1st. We will have no class. You will have all day and so on. Like I was talking about it before, but just to sum it up again. All right, now let's move to the stuff we are talking about. So again, what is monism? It was already mentioned today. Remember, that's just how we today describe how these first philosophers, Thales, Anaximander, Anaximenes, were trying to understand the reality. They were looking for one thing, for one type of thing. So for Thales, it was water. For water was that one thing which reality is made of. For Anaximander, it was what? Apeiron. Apeiron. He thought this apeiron was the fundamental thing which kind of all reality is made of. For Anaximenes, it was air, or pneuma. All of them were trying to find that one type of thing. So they believed that all reality is constructed from that type of physical substance, which would be in everything, in human beings, objects around us, and so on. Now, Parmenides, who I actually talked about a lot more in the video, and we will again talk about him today, was also a monist, but he came to a very, very strange conclusion based on that, because when he started talking about it, and if you watch the video you know, he used his reasoning again, but it led him to a very, very drastic result based on this monistic approach to reality, which is exactly why they will move towards pluralism after that. So we will be talking mostly about the philosophers coming from Elia. That's another part of this Greek world at the time, and today it is southern Italy. It is southern Italy. This is some of the key cities, including Elia. This is where it was in Italy. If you go to Italy today, there are probably some remnants of something there, but of course it's been like 2600 years, so lots of things changed. They are different from Ionians. And remember last time we talked about the Ionians, who were natives of this coast, which today is Turkey, but also part of Greek world at the time, who spoke Greek language and so on. Now, a few words about Pythagoras first. I did not mention him in the video. Pythagoras is a very weird figure. You probably all heard about him when you heard about Pythagorean theorem, right? If you took any math classes or something, geometry, they probably talked about Pythagorean theorem. Now, whether or not Pythagoras had anything to do with this theorem is a big question. Probably not. Who was Pythagoras? He was an interesting figure. He was a mystic. Religious mystic, a type of what he had was a type of more of a sect, really religious type of a sect, and he was what we might say indoctrinating all these people who joined the sect. We don't know much about him for several reasons. One of the reasons we don't know very much about him is that the members of the sect were not supposed to talk about his teaching. They had this vow of secrecy. They were not supposed to talk, and in fact, some of the sources are telling us in order to join Pythagoreans, you had to be silent for several years. That was like their way of initiation. You want to join us? Okay, how about you do not say a single word for several years, and if you pass this test, we will take it. Why would they do that? Well, obviously they wanted to see some proof that that person can keep his mouth shut, literally. How it worked out exactly, we don't know, but that's what the sources are saying. And for this reason, for one thing, we don't know very much about the way he taught. Later on, we know a lot of stuff about how Pythagoreans thought about things, but whether it has anything to do with their founding father, Pythagoras himself, we don't know. Another reason is later on they started attributing virtually anything to Pythagoras, even if it had nothing to do with Pythagoras. After he already died, they were like saying, well, any idea they had, that comes from Pythagoras, because he was like a saint, right? So for this reason, again, even though we know some things about Pythagoreans, the way they were teaching their lifestyle in next century after his death, and he died around 495. So roughly around that time, as far as we know. After that, Pythagoreans still were very strong for at least 50, 100 years. They still had their gatherings and so on without him, and they still continued talking about his stuff. So some of that we actually have preserved in testimony, but we do not know how much of it is Pythagoras and how much of it was made up later. So few interesting things about their teaching. One of them was the idea of what is known as metempsychosis. What is metempsychosis? That's the idea of transmigration of the soul. They were teaching that the soul does not die. It was actually rather new for the Greeks. The Greeks did not think that the soul doesn't die. At that time, the common opinion was that when the person dies, he actually is gone. There's nothing left. The gods, of course, live on Mount Olympus or whatever, but human beings, they are completely destroyed at death. Now, this is one of the newest things introduced with Pythagoreans, was that no, they do not die. In fact, what happens is the soul migrates from not only human beings, but animals and plants. This is the quote from Porphyry, who was not related to Pythagoreans, but he wrote about it quite a bit later, and he had some sources. So he wrote the Life of Pythagoras work. This is the quote. First he declared that the soul is immortal, then that it changes into other kinds of animals. In addition, that things recur at certain intervals, that nothing is absolutely new, and that all things that come to be alive must be thought akin. Pythagoras seemed to have been the first to introduce these opinions in Greece. Yeah, well, it is reincarnation, right? But the difference here with reincarnation, you may say, we just born as other human beings. Now, metempsychosis actually says we can be born as cats, or dogs, or even plants. So essentially, we are always reborn, but as some other stuff, right? So for this reason, they were known to be also vegetarians, because they thought you cannot eat any animals, because animals could be your friends. It could be your dead friend, somebody who you loved, or I don't know, your relative. After he died, he became that animal. You don't know that. It could be, but that's what they believed. The soul, by the way, in Greek is psyche, and for this reason we have psychology today, study of the soul. They cared for all things. They were vegetarians. They were very caring about life around them. Another thing about Pythagoreans which was interesting, which is also why we think that Pythagoras, we associate Pythagoras with Pythagorean theorem, they were really, really into numbers. They thought math and numbers were magical. In fact, they thought arche. Remember we talked about arche last time. They thought arche is the number. So number 1, for example, things consist of numbers, like literally. So to learn the reality, their secret teaching is to learn mathematics. But they had a distinction between two types, again, probably after the death of Pythagoras, akomastikoi and mathematikoi. Akomastikoi were the ones who were actually kind of disagreeing with that a little bit and going slightly different road with secret teachings and secret sayings, akusimata. But mathematikoi, and that's also why we have the word mathematics today that comes back to Greek, they were actually like mathematicians. They believed that everything is numbers. And they saw some correlation between numbers and music. They thought music is, in fact, like the most clear connection of numbers. So these ideas were very influential later, and when we talk about Plato, you will see that Plato has actually, he was greatly influenced by Pythagoreans. He is said to be, for a period of time, very closely related to this sect, to this teaching, and so to him all this stuff meant a lot, and it actually influenced his philosophy, as well as many other things which we talk about. So it's kind of like a good way for us to understand the teaching of Plato, his ideas. Okay, so now back to Parmenides. Parmenides, remember, I don't know if you watched the video, like not that many people, as I can see, watched it, but if you did, he really radically transformed philosophy because of his approach. So before that, we can say that philosophers were interested in cosmology. How does cosmos, that outside universe, work? What is it made of, and so on? Now, Parmenides switched it to what is known as ontology. Why do we call it ontology? Ontos in Greek is being. So he is considered the first immaterialist as well. Immaterialism is different from materialism, from matter. So immaterialism is the view that reality is fundamentally made of non-physical elements, right? Whereas materialism is the view that reality, basic elements of reality are physical, such as water, for example, or air, or something else. Immaterialism would be suggesting that it's not physical. It is something other than physical stuff. Okay, and again, remember, they did not themselves call themselves this. We call them this because today, when we go back and look at them, you may have noticed if you did the reading for this chapter, they talk about anachronism. What is anachronism? Is when you try to think about these people and these philosophers, approaching them with the ideas we have today. Remember, That's not really how you should think about it, because it's easier for us to understand them in this way. This is not how they themselves thought. They lived in a totally different world, and they understood reality in a totally different way. So you can't exactly use our approach. Okay, so what's interesting about Parmenides? He distinguished two things, being and becoming. Being, he said, is the one thing, what is. Becoming, change, is an illusion. There's really no becoming. So this is the fundamental difference between Heraclitus and Parmenides. Heraclitus said everything changes. As an answer to that, Parmenides said, actually, you know what? Nothing changes. Change is a complete illusion. When we say things are changing, we actually are making a mistake. So that is like a radical monism. He's saying everything is this one thing which never changes. The reality, the being, is that one thing. So again, as I tried to explain in the video, this is a little difficult because his work is kind of very abstract, and we also have different interpretations of it. But the idea there is that you can go two different ways. You can speak about things which exist, which he calls what is, and things which do not exist, what is not. But you can't really, he's saying, speak about what is not, or think about what is not, because it is nothing. That's just not possible. So when you think you are talking or thinking about things which are not, you are just deluding yourself. Okay, let's actually discuss that. Let me ask you guys, can we speak of something which doesn't exist? What do you think?
You did mention that it's a contradiction to talk about something that cannot exist, because you can't talk something that does not exist. For example, how would I say it? Parmenides, I think it was Parmenides, thought that it is impossible to talk about nothing because it's a logical contradiction of itself.
Yes, but that's what I'm asking you. Do you agree with that? The typical answer would be, but no, but we can actually talk about what doesn't exist. Right? Most students would say, well, I can talk and think about unicorn on Mars. Do they exist?
Well, you did imagine it, so it could be a possibility that does exist.
Well, but it's possibility, but does it exist? Can you not answer it more or less definitively? You're not sure?
No.
That would be one weird world if we had unicorns on Mars. So I think that for us, especially, given that we did send some satellites to Mars, or not satellites, rockets, and they actually took pictures and everything, we can be more or less sure there are no unicorns there. In fact, nobody ever even found a single unicorn. You know, unicorn is what? A horse with a horn. Have you seen a horse with a horn? Has anybody seen them? Okay, to them personally, it exists. What does that mean? It exists to them? Can there be such thing, but it exists for me, but not for you? Remember, we also mentioned that. So, like, if I believe there's a dog in the apartment next to mine, and you believe there's no dog, does that mean that both of us are right? Is there such thing as there is a dog and there is no dog in the same time?
Either is or isn't, that's the question.
Yeah, because know that if it doesn't matter, you can believe whatever you want. But what if it does matter? What if it really like something which you need to know? So you go into the forest, and I believe there is a dangerous bear which can eat us, and you believe there isn't. So can you say, okay, you have your opinion, I have mine, whatever. Okay, you can say that. But note that once you go to that forest, and if there really is a bear, he will eat you. So your opinion, it really suddenly becomes very important, and as well as mine, because there's actually a truth there. and the truth will sort things out regardless of our opinion. So yeah, you do need some sort of evidence. You need some sort of knowledge of these things, right? But what he's trying to say is something like this. If you are imagining unicorn on Mars, you are imagining something which doesn't exist for a simple reason, because you're using things which actually exist, right? You're using a horse, which exists, a horn, which exists, Mars, which exists. You're just putting them together in the wrong way. Try imagine something which literally does not exist. Note that when people try to imagine like hell and stuff, you look at the paintings of hell. How do they paint hell? They paint devils. How do we imagine devil? Well, he has horns, he has tail, all other parts. Yeah, we've seen that, didn't we? That's what animals have. Can you imagine devil which has certain attributes you've never seen anywhere at all? No, you can't imagine stuff which nobody ever seen at all. So that's kind of a part of that explanation. That's what he's saying is, if you think you are thinking about nothing, you are completely mistaken, because that's impossible. You are thinking of something which actually exists, you're just thinking it, placing it in the wrong way, such as unicorn on Mars. You are putting it together in the wrong way. Anyway, but that's just like one way to look at it. Mythological creatures, yeah, same thing. I mean, do they actually exist? No, we are creating them in our mind. So when we're thinking about them, are we thinking about anything? No, Parmenides would say, no, not at all. We are not thinking about anything. You think you are thinking about something, but that's just empty. There's no content there. What you are thinking about doesn't exist. But it has even another implication here, because he was also talking about, that's one of the reasons he was talking about reality as one thing. He was saying, well, if things change, how can they possibly exist? If it's one thing today and another thing tomorrow, that's not the same thing. So when does it exist? Did it exist yesterday? Or does it exist today? At which point does it actually exist? So you can kind of summarize that. He was saying, whatever exists, exists, and there is nothing apart from that which exists. You can use your reason or logos to distinguish true reality from fiction. But only your reason can lead you to this true fundamental reality. Reality, according to Parmenides, is completely unchanging. It cannot be changing. Well, for one thing, he's saying it is the being, the reality is uncreated, because it cannot have been created from nothing. How can you create something from nothing? Again, look, in the video I was talking about this Christian idea, right, religious idea that God created the world. Well, did it come from nothing? No, it came from God then. But try to imagine it coming literally from nothing. Like there's absolutely nothing. And then, boom, there's reality. Look at physics. They're saying Big Bang happened, right? That's the idea how reality started. Now, ask somebody who is a physicist, what happened before Big Bang and why did Big Bang happen? What will they tell you? They'll tell you, I have no idea. I can't even imagine. Yeah. That's not something science can ever answer. All we know is there was a Big Bang. But that's it. Why did it happen? So they're not even saying there was nothing before the Big Bang. They're just saying we don't know what the hell was before the Big Bang. Because if you say nothing, then next question is, so why the hell did it happen then? Imagine there's absolutely nothing. And then suddenly, bam, Big Bang out of nowhere. That makes no sense. even if we talk about, again, religious account, God created the world, well, God created it for a particular reason, right? He wanted to create something good. That's the idea, to give people or whatever a chance to express themselves. There is all sorts of explanations, but there are explanations. To say that God did it for absolutely no reason whatsoever also doesn't make sense for us. Okay, the another thing he was saying is that being has to be unchangeable and imperishable, because if it could change, what it would change into. Right? You have being, and then you have what? Another being? But how is it different from the first being? So first being then is not being? Are they both being? So he was saying that cannot be happening. It's not changing. The third thing is it is indivisible. You cannot divide it. You cannot take a being and have a line across it and divide it into two beings, because he was saying, well, what would be that line then? Would it be not being? Then he was saying it is generally motionless, because there cannot be any empty space in it. What's empty space? It is nothing, and there's no nothing. And it is some sort of a finite body. So this is kind of a Parmenides' teaching in a nutshell. And remember, again, I talked about Zeno and his paradoxes. Zeno was just trying to explain all that, prove that in a more simplified way. Zeno was his student. Now note that here we have this important distinction, which will be going throughout the entire philosophy. Reason versus the senses. The world appears to us through our senses, right? We can see it, we can feel it, we can hear it. Do our senses tell us the truth? Can we rely on them? And so at that point with Parmenides, the answer becomes no. You have to judge by your reason, because your senses are lying to you. They are not telling you the truth. If you approached it with your reason, you will discover that what senses are telling you is literally impossible. It's a lie. What do you guys think? Do you agree with that? Well, senses is actually not a gut feeling, right? Senses, well, as far as we know today, is this neurological feed you get when your organs of sense are being stimulated by all these natural phenomena, such as light, sound, and so on. But do we actually have the correct picture of reality through our senses? Can we rely on our senses? Because note that these first philosophers, Thales, Anaximander, Examenes, they tried to approach it with their senses, and that's part of the reason they were saying that this stuff like water and air, but he's saying that you can't do that, because your senses aren't going to tell you much about what reality is made of. Can you tell me what this pen is made of? Well, okay, plastic. What's plastic made of? Are your senses going to help you? I mean, you can touch it all you want, you can bite it or something, but that's not going to explain much to you. You can see it all right, you can hear it if you bang it on the table, but that doesn't really tell you what it's made of. How did we discover what it's made of, or at least the science today? We used our reason, right? We used this kind of abstract approach. We'll get to the atoms, but we're not there yet. So remember, atoms came up later. Parmenides is before atoms. He was just responding to the stuff we talked about last time. He was saying that doesn't make any sense to me. It has to be one reality which never changes, like one big chunk of stuff which cannot be divided. That's the only reasonable approach to this whole thing. Okay, so two types of knowledge which were on the first homework, and I hope you noticed it, are related to these two approaches. One of them, it actually is called a posteriori. A posteriori is based on experience, based on our senses. So some philosophers, as we will see later, actually believe that we can have this kind of truths. The truths coming from empirical knowledge. Empiria in Greek means experience. So literally coming from experience. So you learn stuff by your own experience. You touch things, you see things, and that's how you obtain knowledge. But some philosophers, and it started with Parmenides, were saying, no, there's true knowledge is a priori. A priori means prior to experience. So before you even have experience, your reason works and tells you this is necessary truths. So for example, mathematics. So 2 plus 2 equal 4, right? Well, they would say this is the truth, and note that this truth does not change. Does it? Is it possible that tomorrow it will be 5? No. So people like Parmenides would say this is the only true knowledge you can have about the stuff which never changes. The knowledge about stuff which changes, a posteriori knowledge, is not possible, because today you see something, but tomorrow it's different. How can you know it? You can never know it. This is stuff you can know. 2 plus 2 equals 4. That's the kind of stuff, the only kind of stuff you can know. So it is prior to experience. So for this reason it's called a priori, and it is necessary truths because they do not depend on anything. It's a necessary type of truth. Okay, oh, who is this young fellow? I don't know. Who does it look like? Can you recognize? Yeah, it is. Who is it? So the question here, is it really me? Okay, right. So that's the kind of discussion we can have about that. Think of yourself when you were younger. I am here actually on that picture, believe it or not, 15 years old. I'm 15 years old, but I do of course consider it myself, and most people would. But the question here is it still me? I'm not going to tell you how many years have passed, but it is long, long time. Well, okay, if you are so curious, I'm 52 actually. I'm 52 now. So you can count that it was pretty long time ago. Well, that's the question now. Is it still me and is it still you? Know that so many things changed. I can tell you in my life, in me, that it's kind of, biology tells us that the human being completely changes all chemical composition every 7 years. Every 7 years your body is totally renewed. Like some sort of structure is still there, but when you eat stuff, it replaces all the molecules. So after 7 years you have no molecule which is the same as before. Is it still you? How is it still you? Your views change. Perhaps if you go back, well, you guys probably can't go back very long, but if I go back 30 years, I know so much changed about the way I thought about the world, the way I view the world. Yeah, that's one of the fundamental philosophical questions. Things change around us, but are they the same? Not just you, but other stuff too. If it changed so much from the way it was before, is it even the same thing? Why do we consider certain things the same? Why do we use the same name for particular things when in fact they change all the time? And again, more fundamental question which they were concerned with, why? Why all of this happens? What's going on? If you have bunch of stuff, let's say you have bunch of water, right? They thought water is archaic fundamental stuff. Great. Why would water become anything else? Wouldn't you still have bunch of water 1 billion years later? So what do you guys think? Why does change even happen? Will dry up. Well, it dries up because of the sun and all other stuff, right? But like, that's a process. The sun is there. If you study physics, the sun wasn't always there. The sun actually has formed up from the whatever chemical stuff which was in the universe to begin with. And there will not be sun after a certain period of time. What is it, few billion years? Our sun will turn into this red dwarf and then completely collapse, and there will be no sun there. Yeah, the world is almost moving. The question is why? Why is this happening? Well, right, so if you ask that from a scientist, they typically would say, I'm not dealing with this stuff, I don't know. That's not my question. But if you go to philosophy, this is where we ask these questions. This is the kind of questions which indeed are hard to answer. Very hard, perhaps impossible, but we do ask them. This is one of the fundamental philosophical questions. What's equilibrium? Are we ever going to reach equilibrium? Are things going to stop changing? Well, yeah. Anyway, so Zeno again tried to explain Parmenides' ideas and prove them through these paradoxes. So let's look just at least at one of them. They all kind of reductio ad absurdum type of arguments, which basically means that you, in the end, reach the point where you contradict yourself if you continue. And for this reason you accept the argument, because you're saying, well, there's something wrong here, because it leads me to absurd conclusion. So one of them is the famous Dichotomy Paradox. He was saying this is how he proves that movement change is not even possible. He's saying, suppose you have a runner, and he needs to run this distance, right? Now, before he gets to his destination, this, say, 1 mile or whatever, he has to cover half of it, right? Before he covers half of it, he has to cover 1/4 of it. Before he covers 1/4 of it, he has to cover 1/8. Before he covers 1/8, he has to cover 1/60. Well, you got the picture. So he can't ever start moving. How can he start moving? Because note, no matter how small of a distance you take, you can always further divide it. Let's say you divide it and you have like 1 bazillions. Can't you divide that again? Oh, yes, you can. So what is going on? That's how Zeno was actually saying, well, you see, that's, the movement is impossible. Nothing even moves. It can't. Well, why doesn't that mean that he can't move? It should mean it. Your reason tells you that's how things should be. Now, I know the answer is, well, we see people moving, but Parmenides would tell you exactly. It's a lie. They're not moving. Your senses are deceiving you. It's an illusion. And another one, that one which we had a discussion on, Achilles and Tortoise, that's kind of a similar idea too. He basically is saying, well, let's say Achilles is racing Tortoise. Tortoise moves very slowly, Achilles very quickly. Now, the correct approach is, again, the way it is set up, they start moving at the same time exactly. He's moving very fast in this direction. I don't know, let's say he's running at 10 miles per hour. Tortoise is moving very slowly, maybe like 1 mile per hour, maybe even slower, doesn't matter. So if they start moving simultaneously, here's the problem. By the time he gets to the point where Tortoise started, she will make, or he, whatever, make at least some distance, right? By the time he covers that distance, Tortoise will cover a little bit more distance. By the time he covers that little bit of distance, Tortoise will move a little bit more. So he was saying, he will never reach Tortoise. How can he? It's impossible. So again, it is a similar idea that when we look at things, right, if you do that in a street, if you try to race somebody who's moving very slowly, of course you will pass them. You will pass them very quickly. But Parmenides would say, no, it's an illusion. Because you can't. Look, you can't. And it comes back to the following thing, and it actually is, again, a problem in physics today. Is there a smallest particle of time, and is there a smallest particle of matter? Because that's the only way to solve this problem, right? There has to be the smallest particle. if there is a smallest particle, discrete as we call it, discrete particle, let's say a molecule of time and a molecule of space, then of course it can happen. But here's the problem with that. If there's a smallest particle of space, how come you can't divide it? It should have a certain distance, right? Like 0.00000, many zeros, 1 inch. But then wouldn't there be something even smaller than that? So again, if you take physics and they'll tell you everything is made of atoms, that's all right. You can split the atom, you'll get the nucleus and electrons. You can split the nucleus and electrons again, you'll get two quarks. Now today they are saying if you can split the quarks, you'll get strings. Well, here's a $1 million question. Can you split the string? What happens when he reaches the Tortoise? Well, Parmenides would say he never will. So nothing happens. He will never get there. Well, probably, like, if you think about it having any kind of a size, you must be able to split it. Because why not? I mean, the only way you cannot split it is when it will have a size of 0. Right? 0 is the only number you can no longer split. But if it has size of 0, what does it mean? It means it doesn't exist. So again, it comes back to the fact that matter, reality, does not exist. Okay, so that is his paradoxes. And now we get to pluralism. Pluralism is basically a response to that. And the response to that is, okay, there cannot be then one thing reality is made of, but how about reality is made of many things? This is the some of the responses at the time. And again, we will just briefly talk about some of these philosophers. Empedocles was one of the pluralists. He was influenced by Pythagoras too, and he suggested the following structure of reality. He said, how about reality has 4 roots, 4 different things, which would be earth, air, fire, and water. At the time they thought this is 4 different things, so 4 roots which are combined in different ways to make up things. So for example, he would say a bone, a human bone, is made up of 2 parts air, 2 parts water, and 4 parts fire. So if you put it together in this kind of combination, you'll get bone. Naturally, other things also have different combinations. So if you take like 1 part water, 5 part fire, you'll get something else. And they constantly mingle and interchange. And that's why the change happens. But what is driving that? Empedocles was saying love and strife. Those are 2 forces. 2 forces which kind of keep on rearranging that stuff. Love is something which strives for unity, so that these things could go together. But strife is constantly working in opposite direction. So the whole world is kind of goes in a cycle. The first cycle is love wins, everything goes together as one unity. But that's not the end of the story, because then the strife starts working out and everything splits up again. Yeah, they are kind of opposites, but they are forces rather than things. They are not physical. Note that they are forces which just working against each other. And he thought there's really still no empty space. There can't be any empty space, but nonetheless you can have change. How can you change it? Well, these fundamental parts, they kind of replace each other, right? Kind of in a circular way. Like this one replaces this one, and this one replaces this one, so they just mingle. Okay, after, because of that, you have this cosmic cycle, so everything eternally repeats. Note he's influenced by the Pythagoreans, and they actually thought that everything constantly repeats itself. So that comes from them. Everything is repeated. The way we have this class right now, the bazillion years later, we'll be sitting here and having exact same class one more time. And then the bazillion years after that, we'll do it again. And then again, and again, and again, infinitely. So that's the idea of this eternal recurrence. Why? Well, because there's only so many combinations of stuff you can possibly have. So if you arrange stuff in a particular way and then disarrange it, but you have infinite time to play around with this stuff, sooner or later it will go back to where it was. Think about it in this way. If you throw dice, right, and you get a certain combination, suppose you are throwing it after that infinite number of time, wouldn't you get exactly the same combination again? Well, today mathematics actually kind of disagrees with this idea, but the idea nonetheless is there. That's how they thought about this stuff. It always repeats itself. Now, Anaxagoras, that's another pluralist, kind of disagreed with him now and said, well, that's not really a good idea to explain things the way Empedocles explained them. There's 4 roots. That's not very helpful. In fact, it's not even any better than the ideas of this first physicoi, water, apeiron. He was wondering, how could hair come from what is not hair? How can you put together water and fire or whatever other stuff and make hair? To him it did not make any sense. So he was saying, maybe everything is made of everything. There's part of everything in everything. So certain parts are dominating, and because they're dominating, this is what you see. So for example, a bone, human bone, would have parts of iron, parts of, I don't know, plastic, parts of water, parts of literally everything there is in reality. But the dominant part there is the bone. So for this reason it is a bone. So there's a portion of everything literally in everything. It's like this crazy mix, right? But some portions kind of dominate. So to him it made more sense. And another important idea he introduced is the idea of the mind, which instead of love and strife controls everything. Nous in Greek. Nous, he thought, was actually an all-pervading mind which imposes an intelligible pattern on otherwise unintelligible universe. So nous is kind of in charge of all this stuff. It has power over all things that have life, both greater and smaller. Nous had power over the whole revolution. So that internal mind, this kind of cosmic mind, which is just type of a thought, really, that's what controls reality. That's why change happens, because of this nous. Nous is present in all living things. In man, animals, plants, everything has a little bit of it. But it does not create matter. Matter itself is eternal. That kind of a mix of stuff, like bones and water and whatever else. So for this reason, later he'll be criticized by Socrates, who'd say that means he's not really using that nous in any good way. Well, why is it even there? So some of the key questions we have from this entire thing. Although Anaxagoras and Empedocles did not solve the problem of one and many, and the problem, what is the problem of one and many? Well, the problem is there one thing or are there many things? Right? That's the question. Is there just one kind of stuff, or are there many things, stuffs? How do we distinguish certain things? That's one of the biggest problems of this early philosophy they were trying to figure out. How do we, for example, say that there are stones and water? How do we distinguish this stuff? But they help to clarify certain important questions here. And the questions in particular are this. How does the world of things, as we ordinarily perceive them, emerge from some kind of basic stuff? What can it possibly mean? What is this basic stuff? And then how do we have this variety of colors, textures, orders, and so on? Are they real? When you say something is red, what is this redness we're talking about? Is the redness actually in the tomato, or is it in your head? What do you guys think? Where's redness? Well, we perceive it, but is it real? Is it there? Like, suppose there are no human beings left at all. They all died. Would the redness still be in the tomato? No? So it's not real then. Well, animals died too. No living creature left. Is there still redness? Well, maybe we're making it up. So note that this is one of those philosophical questions. We will come back to it like infinite number of times throughout the class. But they are among the first ones who was actually asking that and trying to answer that. Because this is important questions. And note that again, science, physics in particular, kind of started from that. From these types of questions. Because prior to that, they would just give an explanation in terms of the poetic stuff. They would come up with a beautiful myth explaining these things. But at that point, human beings decided that that's not good enough. Perhaps we can do better than that. Perhaps we can somehow get to the bottom of this. It took thousands of years. But note that now we actually know some of this stuff, right? We don't have the complete knowledge, but we have knowledge enough to be able to split the atom and destroy the entire city, among other things. Well, yeah, that's a good question. If it was all in our heads, then wouldn't only a few of us see our redness? But what if the human beings just made in a similar way, right? All human beings have this kind of a similar problem when they see redness. But the redness is not really there. It's just the way human beings are. That when we make it to Kant, Kant is one of the philosophers who will give very interesting answer to that. But anyway, that's way ahead of us. Finally, the atomists. The atomists, Democritus and the atomists were actually some of the first ones who suggested the idea of an atom. We do say that probably, like, the evidence is that Leucippus was the first one, but we have no work of his left, only Democritus. His work still survives, at least in testimonies and so on. So he is the one who is crowned as the inventor of this idea of an atom. And note that the idea of an atom is an attempt to give the answer to this question, to these paradoxes by Zeno, among other things. And the idea is there has to be one tiny little undivisible thing of which everything is made of. That's how the only way you can explain physical reality. There is tiny little bits of some sort. For many centuries, by the way, it was rejected. And then we came back to it in already new time. Well, we call it today particles, right? But they called it atoms. Why? Because atom is just a Greek word which means indivisible, having no parts, or uncuttable. So that's literally what they thought. Of course, now we know we can split it, right? And that's where the particles come out. When you split the atom, you find the particles. But they called it atom because they thought it was the fundamental chunk. No way to split it. It's just one chunk. Maybe even if it has some sort of a size, you just can't split it. It's impossible. That's why they called it atoms. And they actually thought that, unlike we think about it today, they thought they have different sizes, different shapes, and different positions. But they can kind of clump together. And when they clump together, this is what makes stuff. And this is why stuff is different. So some atoms are spiky. And because of that, if you taste it, it has this bitter taste. That's what the bitterness is. The spikes. They are spiking you. And other atoms maybe are very soft. And then they are sweet when you taste them. And so on. So all your feelings, your senses, they just tell you what kind of atoms are hitting your eyes, or what kind of atoms are hitting your ears. And that's how you get all the senses. Because these combinations of atoms is what everything is. So that's when they came up with this idea, and they also introduced the idea of the void, because they thought, well, if there's just atoms right next to each other, right, then it's difficult for them to move, even though there's a way for them to move by like replacing each other. But atomists thought, no, there has to be a space between them, and that space is just the void. So it is no thing, but it's not nothing. To the Greeks it was a very strange idea. It's like, so what the hell is it then? If there's no thing, wouldn't it be nothing? We today may call it vacuum, right? Vacuum is the kind of space which has absolutely nothing. Well, they couldn't even create vacuum. So to them everything had at least air. But we today can create vacuum. So we kind of, I guess, proven this point. Nonetheless, that's what they thought, that there can be some sort of space which has absolutely nothing. To us it seems like natural, because oh yeah, when you fly into outer space, there is nothing there. It's like vacuum. There's no air or nothing. But to them it was very new, and many of them disagreed with that. So it was just one of the ideas they were kind of discussing. And the atomists said, no, there is such thing. Empty space is something, but it is empty. So there's nothing there. Even to us it's like strange to talk about it in this way. So like, there's nothing there, so how is it something? To them it was especially strange. So this is the difference between the way Parmenides thought about it and Democritus. So Parmenides thought there is a being, which is what is, and there is no empty space. There is no not being. But for Democritus, there is being which can have atoms, and it also can have nothing, which is this void. But there is also not being which is completely no nothing, and that's a different thing from the nothing which has nothing in it. Right? Well, we hopefully can understand what he means there. Like, it's one thing to have empty space, which is kind of a nothing, but it actually is something. But another thing is to have completely nothing. It's like there's not even an empty space there. Can you guys see the difference? I mean, it's hard to imagine it, but we can kind of understand it, can't we? Yeah, the void is between the atoms. This is how they actually interact. So like there is maybe several atoms, right? Then they kind of clump together and make one sort of a thing. So that's how he explained change among other things. Things kind of clamp up one way, then they declump. But they actually thought based on that everything is determined, everything is necessary, because, well, if reality is completely physical and consists of atoms, how can there be things like freedom of the will? How can there be any kind of, chance encounters? So necessity then has to rule. Well, I guess, so Louis says, a good analogy for Democritus' being is turning off the lights, with the darkness being the void. You see nothing, but it's still a thing. Turning on the lights as being. Yeah, it's kind of like that's part of it, except, of course, in that case you're talking about no light, but there are still objects. But we know, again, in outer space, if you fly out of the atmosphere, you will have both. There will be no light, and there will also be no air and no objects in it. So there's literally nothing. Vacuum. But it's not literally nothing, because literally nothing is that stuff. It would have not even that. And again, in physics, right, we know that our universe has a particular size. That's what today physics will tell you. You can actually get, well, at least theoretically, to the side of it. Because, just little lesson of physics. Do you guys know what Big Bang, they say, in what happened with Big Bang? Big Bang is the entire universe was like one tiny little dot, right? and then it exploded and then started expanding in different directions. How do we know? Well, we don't really know, but when we observe the universe today, it actually is expanding. Based on our observation, you can definitely see that it was smaller and it's getting bigger. This is what physicists would tell you. Here's the question now. What is outside of it? Oh, great. So you, if you major in astrophysics, you should know a little bit about. But there's the question to you then. What's outside of it? What is outside the universe? Well, it can't be vacuum, right? Vacuum is already something. Nothing, exactly. It's nothing which is not vacuum. So this would be that nothing. That would be nothing which is absolutely nothing. Not even vacuum, no space, no time, nothing. It's impossible for us to imagine, but that would be the only answer, because it's outside of our universe. Well, I don't know. What is beyond nothing? That's an even harder question. I don't even know what nothing is, never mind what's beyond it. Okay, so, and based on that, they again were talking about knowledge. They were saying that we can only have knowledge, and this is atomists, right, of atoms in the void. That would be the what they call true-born knowledge. That's the knowledge which is objective. But if you try to know stuff, even like colors, sounds, smells, and tastes, that would be subjective knowledge, which they call bastard knowledge. Bastard in a sense that it's not like a true son. It's like not a true-born knowledge. It's just an illusion. I don't know, Maria. I've never been there. I'm not even a physicist. Is it really nothing, or can we not imagine? That's some of the questions which, like, still don't have any answers, but we have every right to ask them. Doesn't mean we will ever get the answer to them. 2 + 2 versus the color red. Well, I guess. But note that the atoms themselves have no colors, right? And they have no sounds. What colors and sounds are is kind of like our impression we get from the atoms. But since we can't see the atoms, we are wrong when we think something is red. What is actually happening is there are atoms of a particular, I don't know, say triangular shape, which are hitting our eyes, and that's why we see red. But there's no redness. It's just atoms which have this particular shape. Maybe they're very spiky. So for this reason, our eyes is reacting in this way. It's kind of like bright red color. Okay, so this is their explanation of that. Now, kind of conclude this entire thing, because we will move on from pre-Socratics for next week, and we'll talk about the sophistic movement, which is somewhat different. Note that it is kind of a very dangerous and weird way our reason is leading us. And to quote the book again, the book says that it seems that the fanatical concern with logical consistency and rules of thinking led to theories which, though logically consistent, did not match the observed facts, right? Because we do see that Achilles can overtake Tortoise. We do see that people can move. Stuff moves. So when our reason is telling us this is not happening, something seems to be off here, right? There's definitely some sort of a problem here. So of course some people may still accept that and say, yeah, our senses are lying to us. But then most of us would say, doesn't seem to make sense, right? Maybe there is another problem. Maybe there's a problem with our reasoning. And again, when we get to Kant, you will see how Kant answers that. He has an answer, actually. Whether you accept it or not is a different question, but he will have an answer. So for this reason, many people were just thinking philosophers are kind of crazy. The philosophers are insane people who are confusing all of us. And there was a shift which happened somewhere around the 5th century BC, from this kind of questions, from cosmological questions, towards more of a type of a human question, such as, well, let's forget all this stuff. We don't know how reality is made. How about we worry about more simple things, such as how should we live? How should we behave? Is there such thing as good behavior and bad behavior? Ethical questions. Remember, we talked about at the beginning, there is this part of philosophy, ethics. Ethics. Ethics deals with questions such as what is moral behavior? How should we act? And so, sophistic movement and Protagoras in particular, it's kind of like this answer to attempt to give an answer to all that. So we're shifting with next week from cosmological questions, from questions about reality and ontological questions, to ethical questions, to questions more about correct behavior, correct conduct. How should we live our life regardless of whether we will ever know if there is such thing as nothing? And people other than philosophers probably don't even care, right? Most people don't care if there's nothing, but what we do care is why shouldn't we, for example, kill other people? Why shouldn't we steal their stuff? Because that's something which definitely affects us right now as well as thousands of years ago. So those are the questions they were trying to answer in a variety of ways. This is where we will also get to Socrates. So just to wrap it up, for Monday, because we will see each other Monday again, right? Make sure you read chapter 3 about the sophists, and make sure you do the homework and quiz on chapter 2. This is the material we have just finished covering. There is a homework and there is a quiz. Not a very large quiz, but nonetheless, both of them are kind of important parts of it. They are both due January 31st, which is Sunday, at 11:59 p.m., so by midnight. You can do them right now. You can do them today after this class. You can do them tomorrow. You can do them any day until Sunday. But again, remember, if you don't do it by Sunday midnight, they will just be graded as 0. So make sure you actually do that. I will, again, as usual, post this video on YouTube. You can rewatch it if you want. That's a good question. I think the quiz should be should also give you 3 attempts. I never taken them myself, right? I will double check. I said it so that everything should give you 3 attempts, but whether it applies to the quiz or not, I have to double check that. The quiz is due in the same time as the homework. You should see it there. Again, if you go on this weekly view, you will see that there's stuff due on January 31st. It has red dot. It means it is actually graded. So there will be that quiz and there will be the homework. Homework is again kind of large because it covers all these philosophers. It has nice animations and stuff explaining to you all these ideas, the kind of stuff I cannot necessarily show you. It talks about Pythagoreans, Parmenides, Zeno, and so on. And the quiz is again on the same stuff. It's not very long, but it's due together with the homework. You can do it anytime before then, but you have to do it by Sunday deadline. Yeah, like I said, I will double check. I'll send you, I guess, a message about it later when I find out. It probably is 3 attempts, but let me see. I'll try to go in there and find out. Okay, so that's all for today, and we are out of time. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed philosophy. It gets hopefully even more interesting, but I'll try to do my best. It's better to do it in class, but nonetheless online it has its own advantages too, because at least you can like rewatch it. Yeah, okay. So I'll try to update you on this. That's all we have for today. See you Monday.